It's July 1969. A referee blows his whistle somewhere in Mexico City. The stadium erupts. But the real explosion isn't here. It's 1,500 kilometers away, on a border that's about to become a battlefield. Within 100 hours, over 2,000 people will be dead. Entire villages burned, a region scarred for a generation. And it all started with a football match. This is the story of the football war. In the late 1960s, Central America is simmering. El Salvador is one of the most densely populated countries in the Western Hemisphere. It's tiny, roughly the size of Massachusetts, but home to over 3 million people. Land is scarce. Poverty is suffocating. Wealthy families control nearly everything. Ordinary Salvadorans have almost nothing. Across the border, Honduras is different, larger, less crowded, still poor, but with enough land that tens of thousands of Salvadoran migrants have crossed over illegally to farm it. By 1969, an estimated 300,000 Salvadorans are living in Honduras without documentation. For years, the Honduran government tolerates this. Then, under mounting pressure from Honduran landowners who want the migrants gone, the government changes its mind. In January 1969, Honduras begins enforcing a new land reform law. Salvadoran farmers are evicted from land they've worked for years, some violently. Families are stripped of everything they built and pushed back across the border. In El Salvador, the returning migrants pour into a country that already has no room for them. Unemployment spikes. Resentment builds. The two governments trade accusations. Diplomatic relations deteriorate. By the spring of 1969, Honduras and El Salvador are as close to war as two countries can get without actually fighting. Then the World Cup qualifier draw is announced. CONCACAF, the governing body for North and Central American football, places El Salvador and Honduras in the same qualifying group for the 1970 Mexico World Cup. 3 matches, home and away, and a playoff if needed. The first game is played on June 8, 1969, in Tegucigalpa, the Honduran capital. The night before, Salvadoran fans staying near the stadium are kept awake deliberately. Honduran supporters gather outside their hotel, banging drums, throwing rocks at windows, setting off firecrackers until dawn. The Salvadoran players barely sleep. The next day, Honduras wins 1-0. Back in San Salvador, an 18-year-old girl named Emilia Bolaños is watching the match on television. When the final whistle blows, she walks to her father's desk drawer, takes out a pistol, and shoots herself in the heart. She leaves no note. Her death is reported across El Salvador as an act of patriotic grief. The country's newspapers call her a national hero. The president of El Salvador attends her funeral. The army lines the streets. She is carried to the cemetery wrapped in the national flag. The second match is played 1 week later on June 15th in San Salvador. Honduras brings its own fans. They are met at the airport by crowds throwing rotten eggs and dead rats. Their hotel windows are smashed overnight. Dead mice are found under their pillows. The Honduran players arrive at the stadium shaken and exhausted. El Salvador wins 3-0. In Tegucigalpa, the result triggers riots. Salvadoran migrants are attacked in the streets. Homes are burned. Several people are killed. Thousands of Salvadorans flee Honduras on foot, arriving at the border with nothing. The Salvadoran government counts them as they cross. Within 2 weeks, more than 11,000 refugees pour back into a country that cannot absorb them. The two governments formally break off diplomatic relations on June 27, 1969. The playoff match is still scheduled. It goes ahead anyway. June 27, 1969, Mexico City, Estadio Azteca. Neutral ground, 15,000 fans, tight security. Both governments have ordered their citizens to behave. Nobody does. Salvadoran fans light fires in the stands. Honduran supporters respond. Scuffles break out across the terraces. Police move in. The match itself is brutal. A war of attrition across 90 minutes, then 30 minutes of extra time, before El Salvador scores the only goal in the 101st minute. El Salvador is going to the World Cup. In Honduras, Salvadoran-owned businesses are torched. more migrants are attacked. The Honduran government announces it has documented 900 cases of violence against Salvadoran citizens on its soil. In El Salvador, the government has heard enough. On July 14, 1969, at 6 p.m., the Salvadoran Air Force launches its first strike. A fleet of aging propeller-driven planes, some of them literal Second World War relics, crosses the border and attacks Honduran air bases and fuel depots. The Salvadoran ground forces follow. Thousands of infantry soldiers pour across the border in 3 separate columns, advancing into Honduran territory along the main roads. The Honduran military scrambles to respond. Their air force is small, but more modern. Their ground forces are outnumbered, but better supplied. Within 24 hours, both sides are fighting across a frontier that stretches hundreds of kilometers. Villages caught between the two armies are destroyed. Civilians flee with whatever they can carry. Salvadoran columns advance deep into Honduran territory in the west, capturing several towns. In the east, Honduran counterattacks push back. The air forces bomb each other's cities, fuel depots, power stations, bridges. On the ground, soldiers are fighting over farmland, dirt roads, and border towns with no strategic value beyond the simple fact that the other side wants them. The killing is fast, disorganized, and devastating. In just 4 days of fighting, estimates place the death toll between 2,000 and 6,000 people. Soldiers and civilians both. Thousands more are wounded. Entire communities are displaced. Farmland is burned. Infrastructure is wrecked. Then, on July 18th, the Organization of American States issues a ceasefire demand. Both governments agree. The guns go quiet. For now. The football war lasts exactly 100 hours. El Salvador withdraws its forces by early August under sustained OAS pressure and the threat of economic sanctions. But the damage is done in ways that can't be undone on a map. The 300,000 Salvadoran migrants who had been living in Honduras are now permanently expelled. Most return to El Salvador. The country, already at breaking point, absorbs them. The land crisis that began the whole chain of events grows worse. The rural poor are now poorer. The cities more crowded, the government more fragile. In the years that follow, the tension inside El Salvador doesn't dissipate. It deepens. Inequality becomes impossible to ignore. Political violence increases. The ruling class tightens its grip. Peasant organizations begin to form, then guerrilla groups, then open insurgency. In 1979, a military coup. In 1980, Archbishop Oscar Romero is assassinated while saying Mass, shot through the heart by a sniper in a chapel in San Salvador. In that same year, 4 American churchwomen are abducted, raped, and murdered by the Salvadoran National Guard. The Salvadoran Civil War begins in 1980. It lasts 12 years. 75,000 people are killed. Hundreds of thousands more are displaced. Many of them flee north, to the United States, to Mexico, to wherever they can reach. Historians are careful not to draw a straight line from a football qualifier to a civil war. The causes of that conflict run deep: economic exploitation, Cold War proxy politics, decades of elite rule and military repression. None of that was caused by a football match. But the football war accelerated everything. It closed off a pressure valve. The Salvadoran migrants who had been surviving in Honduras, however precariously, were now home, adding mass and momentum to a crisis that was already building. The institutions that might have managed the tension were instead preparing for the next war. The OAS brokered a formal peace treaty between Honduras and El Salvador. It wasn't signed until 1980, 11 years after the final whistle in Mexico City. El Salvador went to the 1970 World Cup. They were placed in a group with the Soviet Union, Mexico, and Belgium. They lost all 3 matches. They conceded 9 goals and scored none. Emilia Bolaños, the 18-year-old who died after the first match, is still remembered in El Salvador. A stadium in the capital bears her name. She became a symbol of a kind of patriotism so intense it consumed itself. A country that loved its flag more than it could feed its people and paid for that mismatch for generations. The border between Honduras and El Salvador, the one that soldiers crossed in both directions in July 1969, remained formally disputed until 1992, when the International Court of Justice issued a final ruling dividing the contested territory. 2 countries, 100 hours, a football match in the middle of it all. Not the cause of anything, but the match that lit the fuse on a powder keg that had been sitting there, in the heat, for years.